Cynthia Littleton. Hello, Cynthia. How you doing? Cheers.
Hello, and congratulations. That was
Thanks.
quite a. I have had the pleasure of seeing 3 episodes, and on a much smaller screen.
Right.
This was a nice treat. Really showed off.
Yeah, this is sort of the dream to see to see it up on the big screen, because we always thought of it, pretty cinematically, and it's exciting to be able to see it at that size.
Yeah. No, I bet. What struck me in watching this first episode is how much track you lay, how much world building you do in setting the kind of ecosystem of the prison, the hierarchy of who's in charge, who's not in charge, who's doing their job, Benicio del Toro's incredible presence. You do the prison, you do the world, the community around them, very kind of a hard scrabble town, very difficult, living conditions during the winter. You just really capture that so well. As you said, or as David said, this is a stranger than fiction story. How did you first dive into it? What made you make this film, this project?
Well, it was just the story itself was hard to believe, and I was really attracted to the reality of how something like this actually happens. When I heard that these 2 guys escaped and they cut their way out of the prison, and this woman who worked at the prison was smuggling in hacksaw blades and hamburger meat to them, it sounded made up, but it really happened. And it ended up being the biggest manhunt in New York State history. They were on the run for 3.5 weeks in the Adirondacks, and I was just really interested in if I was going to make something in this genre or about a prison escape, which has been done so many times, it was how to approach it from the point of view of how something would really happen. And that involved setting up the relationships and as you said, the prison ecosystem, how everybody interacts in this world, and how the prison dominated this town and does dominate that town, and really this part of New York State, the economy in the state, how that tailor shop worked in terms of these hardened criminals, 40 murderers and rapists who are there working for one civilian supervisor and one corrections officer in a room with 13-inch shears, and working for about 35 cents an hour for a real corporation that is a for-profit corporation, and a civilian who has to oversee them and make their quota. Just that in itself was such a bizarre thing to me. So all of that was what was interesting to me, and so we sort of dived in, and as David said, it's been the last couple of years, and we had a chance to do some research and get up there and get to know the people up there, and that really was an important part of it.
And in this format where you have 8 hours to really explore this story, it feels like you have the time to really let us know who these characters are, where they fit in this very distinctive, very, rather grim world that they live in. Can you imagine trying to tell this story in a 2-hour feature format? Would it be possible?
I think, well, there's definitely a version of it. It just wouldn't have, I think, as much of the, it wouldn't be as interesting, because it would just be pretty reductive. You wouldn't be able to tell the stories of all the characters. And I feel what we do in the 7 parts is we have a chance to sort of lay out the world, and then kind of build on that, and hopefully it builds in terms of the just the tension and the pace. But then there's also a chance to tell you a little bit more about these characters. A lot of times in a prison escape story, you can't help but want to identify with the protagonists who are trying to escape, because everybody wants to see them get out. And I knew that was going to happen in this, and Brett Johnson and Michael Tokum, the writers, and we all thought about that, and really wanted to have a chance to show who they were as people also, and why they were in jail eventually, and all these things, so I think you wouldn't be able to do that in a 2-hour movie, and I think the nuances of the reality in terms of like how does it get to a point where these guys could actually create a relationship with someone. I mean, when we come in, obviously she already has a relationship going on, But how it gets to that, and how then it changes with Paul's character, and how Benicio's character comes in, which you start to see the beginning of at the end of the first episode. It's all based in reality. It all happened over the course of about a year, and so we thought this, in trying to figure out how many episodes it should be, we sort of, took a guess, really, well, how many hours can this sustain, and what would be right? And so we sort of honed in on this 7-part, 8-hour idea, and hopefully, I looked at it as each episode having a very distinctive beginning, middle, and an end, and because I think you have to want to come back and watch the next episode. But overall, it also has that, the arc of the whole story. But there's a chance to tell different kinds of stories within the 7 parts and have different feelings to each episode.
You see the personality of each character is really deepened in subsequent episodes, obviously, and just letting them know, letting the audience know what really drove them. Let's talk about the casting. I mean, it's a real tour de force for Benicio, for Paul Dano, for Patricia Arquette. I mean, there's not a weak link in the key cast members. Can you talk about how you got Benicio for that role?
It took a bit of time to get him. He'd never done television before, and he was intrigued by the project, and I met with him a number of times, and we talked about it. He's also an artist. I think he was really interested in that aspect of Richard Matt's character.
A visual painter, you're saying?
He's also a painter. We just talked about it, and at that point, Patricia was the first person to come on board, and Patricia was always the first choice for me, just because she's such an amazing actor, in that she has no sense of ever wanting the audience to have to like her character, or she's willing to let go of all vanity just to be the character and portray a human being who she trusts the audience will connect with on some level. She's not trying to pull you in. And so she was on board. I think Benicio wanted to work with her. And then after a number of meetings, he decided to dive in.
Benicio brings this quiet menace that just grows and grows and grows. It's it just, what he brings to that character with the look, with the arch of an eyebrow.
That was all my idea.
It was all good direction.
I wanted to be really nice and sweet, and I said, "There's be Benicio."
And Paul Dano too is typically known for lighter roles. How did you happen to see him in this role?
I think David Sweat's a really interesting guy, because he says that he claims he wasn't, he was in for murder. He was in for, he killed a police officer. But he claims that there were circumstances around the killing that he's not totally responsible for. I think he feels like he's not a guy who should be in there. And he felt that he had to build up and create this sort of false exterior of who he was in prison to protect himself. He would lift weights and act tougher than he was. And I felt that Paul we had a chance to visit him, and we spent about 5 or 6 hours with him. And I think Paul, has that sort of inner sensitivity, and that feeling that I think Sweat feels about himself. And what was great was to see Paul sort of, put on that tougher exterior that I think David Sweat put on as a protection in prison also.
Do you know, did Patricia get the chance to meet with the real Joyce?
I think Patricia chose not to meet with Joyce, and I think she watched her interviews, and we read all of her transcripts of all of her interviews with the state police, and she felt that she wanted to have some distance from her. And but yet, the Inspector General of New York, who saw the series, felt that she really captured her essence from her having spent time with her. And I think, I think Patricia she's such a complicated character. And she's not one thing or the other. At one point you feel like, well, she's being manipulated, and then on the other hand, she's really manipulating a lot of people also. So, it's really interesting to kind of figure out who she is, I think, all throughout the series.
She's reveals more and more about the character, obviously, as the series goes on, and she just breaks your heart with the complexity that she brings to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because Tilly, if you talk to the Inspector General of New York, she would say, Tilly doesn't break your heart. She's, she really feels that she's a bad person, because there was a conversation of, eventually they plot to escape, and one of the questions that comes up is what to do about Tilly's husband, Lyle. And there was a point in time where they were considering prosecuting Joyce Tilly for murder, attempted murder, because there was a plan to kill her husband, to get rid of her husband. And Richard Matt, I guess, I don't know, spoiler alert, did you guys, am I allowed to tell you? Well, everybody knows, he died, Richard Matt died. Nobody knows what his side of the story is. David Sweat claims that they weren't trying to kill her, that he wasn't trying to kill her husband, but it was insinuated that that Tilly did want them to kill her husband. So it's hard to understand where the truth lies in all of this, because one person's not alive and the other two aren't necessarily telling the truth.
Right, and you've done a lot of work, research to kind of piece it all together. Another great bit of casting is Bonnie Hunt as the New York Inspector General, who about a year after the actual breakout, as you and I talked about, there was a report that came out that reads like a novel in terms of all the detail of all of that. And Bonnie Hunt is just it's a little off type for her, but she just delivers such a great performance.
Yeah, well, she's a very good actor, and she's obviously very funny. But when I met Catherine Leahy Scott, the Inspector General, I thought she's a really smart, funny, tough Inspector General but she has a great sense of humor about her job. And when we met with her, that was where we had the idea really to actually create the character of the Inspector General when we were breaking out the series, because we felt that report was really important. But then when we met her, we felt she was such an interesting character that it would be great to see it through her eyes and sort of bookend the story through her investigation, which is really what ended up being the source material for the show.
You teamed with a lot of the producers and writers that have worked on Ray Donovan, the Showtime series, to bring this to life. Can you talk about how you became involved in this? It's been quite a commitment for you to direct all episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they offered it to so many people who turned it down that it finally got to me, because I was so happy to get sent the material. I didn't know them at all. I didn't know Brett or Michael Tolkien. I knew who Michael was from his, he wrote The Player and has directed a couple of movies. And I got sent a script that they wrote about 2 months after the escape happened. And I thought it was really well written, and I asked them how much of it was true. And they said, well, we made up a lot of it because we don't know. And I was like, okay. And I had to figure out if I thought I could make that version, and I felt I couldn't because I really didn't have a take on it. I didn't want to just make up a prison escape story. What was interesting to me was the reality. So I passed on it, and I said, thank you, but I just don't think I can figure out how to do this. And then when the Inspector General report came out a few months later, we all called each other up immediately because we were so excited to read it. And I said, if you don't have a director still, maybe we should start from scratch, using this report as our source material, and just try to do everything from the real, just as much of the real story as possible. And then we started reading all of the transcripts, and then we started going up to Dannemora, and we had about a year while we were putting the show together and casting it and writing it to be able to go up there and start to meet everybody. And then eventually the governor of New York State, Governor Cuomo, allowed us access to the prison. So those scenes that you see when they're on the yard and they're sketching and he's talking about the shadows, that's on the actual north yard of Clinton Correctional, where at the court where David Sweat and Richard Matt would hang out and do that. So that was amazing for us to have the access to the real prison. And and the technical advisors that we got from the real prison to be able to really tell the story, I think, in a much fuller way.
All of this is, the subject matter, the tone is different from things that you've directed in the past. Did you pursue this because you wanted to stretch a different muscle as a director?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in directing different kinds of things. It just has never really happened. And when this happened, you know, when this came to me, this material, I just was taken by the combination of elements in it, because it wasn't just a genre piece, it wasn't just an escape story, it was about human relationships, and it was it was a drama. I thought it could be a little funny also, but it ended up being a little more serious. But I don't think, for me, it's something I've always wanted to do, and really it harkened back to the movies that I grew up watching, and television shows also, that the tone of movies from the 70s, like Dog Day Afternoon, or Taking a Pelham 123, or Straight Time, where, you know, they were dramas, but there was humor within them. Straight Time doesn't have as much humor, but they were dramas that had real characters that were complicated and were character-driven pieces that were not heavy on plot. But I found them fascinating, and you know, that's the kind of movie that I always wanted to make growing up. So in this material, I saw an opportunity for that, because there's something about the prison too that's really timeless, and that when you go into the prison, there's no, you can't bring your phone in, there's no cameras, no phones, so communication is like it's pre-digital. So people are forced to pass notes to one another, or a nod, or just a look, or a little whisper means so much. And that place is stuck in time. I mean, you go in there and it could be 1930, it could be 1970. And that lent itself, I think, to the tone of what we were doing, too.
Well, even though some of us know how it ends, we're very interested to see more. Congratulations, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.